Morning, everyone. Namo Buddhaya. So we'll continue with our series on uh, Dharma uh, at workplace. And the previous session, Venerable Legden had covered the session on how to use mindfulness to deal with situations at your workplace. And today we're going to look at uh, how we can handle conflicts, conflict management. I'm sure we've all experienced some or the other form of conflict at workplace. So uh, we'll see how we can bring in some of our training, Buddhist training, into dealing with conflicts at work. So let's begin the session by just doing a short meditation to calm our minds and settle our mind, just clear the chatter in our mind. So like we do for our sessions, today we'll do a mindfulness meditation, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of breath, or anapanasati it's called. And then that will uh, do a short motivation setting for the session. And then maybe I'll just recite one or two prayers for removing the obstacles for our spiritual progress. And then we'll begin the actual session. So, yeah, relax and make sure you have a good posture or cross-legged, of course. If you're sitting in a chair for the online participants, make sure that you have your back erect and then shoulders straight, arms relaxed, and use the meditation posture. Use keep your right palm resting in your left palm with the tip of the thumbs touching each other, and chin slightly tucked in, um, and tip of the tongue resting against the upper row of teeth just behind them. And you can either keep your eyes half open or closed. If it's half open, then point your gaze just down the tip of your nose in the space in front of you. So just take a moment to compose yourself. And then bring the focus of your mind to the area between the tip of your nose and the upper lip, and observe the sensations that you experience there. These are quite subtle sensations, so it can be a little difficult, but you can try. Then bring the focus of your mind to your in-breath. Just observe which nostril you're breathing in through, and observe the sensations that you experience in that nostril. Then shift the focus of your mind to the out breath and observe the sensations that you experience in the nostril as you breathe out. Uh, Now, in order to help us focus better, maybe we can use the aid of counting. So maybe you do a counting meditation. So as you breathe in, you count one, one, and as you breathe out, count two, two, and then alternate till 10, and then start over again. Now, with your minds sufficiently focused, let's do a short motivation setting for the session. So, just recollect that in this lifetime, as humans, we have access to what is called the eight freedoms and the 10 endowments. So, we're very fortunate. In the past, we have wandered um, and taken rebirth in all kinds of forms, in all the different planes, realms of samsara. But we've not been uh, as fortunate as we are in this particular lifetime because we have access to the enabling conditions or the eight freedoms and the 10 endowments. But we know from our discussion on death that because of the uncertainty of the timing of death, we could die any moment, could be even today, and we'll be separated from these freedoms and endowments at the time of death. And there's no certainty that in the future we'll have access to these enabling conditions. Uh, so there's no certainty that we'll be reborn as humans again. Um, Maybe it's more likely that we'll spend time in the lower realms where there's enormous suffering and we'll have to endure all that kind of suffering. And then by chance, if we are reborn as humans or devas, we also know that there's a lot of suffering in the human realm and the realm of gods. There's suffering of birth, aging, sickness, death, uh, a lot of mental suffering too in the human realm. And so is the case with the realm of the gods. So there's nothing trustworthy about any kind of birth, birth in the upper realms in samsara. So there's no place in samsara which is free of suffering. So in this lifetime, we have access to the doctrine, and also have been blessed with a wonderful intelligence through which we can discriminate and understand the virtues of liberation and the flaws of samsara. So, having understood the benefits of liberation, let's all resolve that we'll train so that we progress towards liberation from the cycle of suffering in samsara. But mere individual liberation is not sufficient. So we need to work for not just ourselves, but also our dear ones and the rest of the sentient beings in this universe. They're all trapped in the samsara. They're all suffering, and they do not have the same kind of access to the teachings that we have. So by generating compassion for all the sentient beings, we should all aspire for attaining a state that will provide us with the capacity to help them in their pursuit of liberation from samsara. So that state that we need to aspire for is the state of omniscience, complete enlightenment. And in order for us to progress on that path towards omniscience, we need some assistance. And that assistance comes from the three jewels of refuge, the jewel of Buddha, the teacher who showed the path itself, which is the jewel of the Dharma, which is in the form of the scriptures and the realizations in the mind streams of the realized ones. And then the Sangha who practices these teachings, the disciples who practice the paths shown by Buddha and have attained some realizations, and hence can guide us, assist us on this path. So that is the third jewel, the jewel of Sangha. So now let us, with a very sincere mind, take refuge in these three jewels through a short refuge prayer. So Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. So with the three jewels visualized in front of us, so maybe we can take a moment to just visualize the three jewels in space in front of you. So the jewel of Buddha, the jewel of the Dharma, and the jewel of Sangha, you can visualize in the space in front of you. And then make full prostrations. Just visualize and make mental prostrations. Just visualize that there are infinite copies of you in the space that pervades the entire universe, and make extensive prostrations to the three jewels. And then make extensive offerings that fill up the entire space. And make these offerings to the three jewels. And then confess all your infractions and transgressions that you've committed. Even as householders, you have upasak vows. Some of you have taken the upasak vows. So if you've transgressed any of those upasak vows or upasaka vows, confess them. And through confession, you can purify those transgressions. And also, we've created a lot of merit, accumulated a lot of merit. Not just us, but others have also accumulated a lot of merit. And we are creating more merit. We'll create a lot of merit in the future also. So let's rejoice in all the merit that we created and will create in the future and are creating right now. Not just by ourselves, but by others also. So just rejoice in this merit. And plead with the teachers, the gurus, to enter nirvana and continue turning the wheel of the doctrine so that uh, all the beings benefit from these teachings. And also dedicate these merits for our enlightenment, complete enlightenment. We'll just chant a short Bodhicitta prayer. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So that's the Bodhicitta prayers. We'd seen that in the session yesterday. So Chittotpad Pararthai Samyak Sambodhikamta. So I aspire for the state of complete enlightenment for the purpose of accomplishing others' welfare. So that is the Bodhicitta prayer. So with that, we have set good motivation for this session. So I'll just recite one prayer to remove whatever obstacles we may have in our spiritual practice. So I'll recite the Heart Sutra. So in this text, if you have this text, it's on page number 16, the English version. So you can recite the prayer, or if you are comfortable with reciting the Sanskrit version, it's on page number 19. So I'll just recite it quickly in Sanskrit. So, Namo Sarvajnaya एवं मैं श्रुत में किस्मीन समय भगवान राजकृ विहरति स्म ग्रूतकूटे पर्वते माता भिक्ष संगेन साधर्म माता च बोधिसत्व संगेन तेन खलु समेन भगवान गंभीराव संबोधन नाम समाधि समापन्नः तेन च समेन आर्यवलिक्तेश्वरो बोधिसत्व मासत्व गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमिताय कर्याम चर्मान एवं व्योलोकति स्म पंचस्कंदांस्तान् च स्वभावशून्यान् समन्वपश्यति स्म पंचस्कंदांस्तान् च स्वभावशून्यान् व्योलोकति यथाश्मान शारिपुत्र बुद्धानुभावेन आर्यावलिक्तेश्वरं बोधिसत्वमेतदोचते कश्चिन् कुलपुत्र गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्याम च कामकृतं शिक्षितव्य एव मुक्त्यार्यवलिक्तेश्वरो बोधिसत्वमासत्व आयुष्यमन्तं शारिपुत्रमेतदोचत कश्चिन् चारिपुत्र कुलपुत्र कुलदीता वा स्याम गंभीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्याम च काम तेनैव व्योलोकितव्यम् पंचस्कंदास्तान् च स्वभावशून्यान् समनुपश्यति स्म रूपं शून्यता शून्यतैव रूपं रूपानुपृथक् शून्यता शून्यतानुपृथक् रूपं यद्रूपं सा शून्यता या शून्यता तद्रूपम् एवं वेदना संन्यासंस्कार विज्ञानानि च शून्यता एवं शारिपुत्र सर्वधर्म शून्यता लक्षणानि उत्पन्नानि वृद्धाम्लाविन्दानुना सम्पूर्णाः तस्मात् शारिपुत्र शून्यतां न रूपं न वेदना न संज्ञा न संस्कार न विज्ञानं न चक्षुः न श्रोत्रं न घ्राणं न जीवा न कायो न मनो न रूपं न शब्दो न गन्धः न धर्मं न चक्षुर्धातुर्यावन्न मनो धातुर्न धर्मधातुर्न मनो विज्ञान धातु न विद्या न विज्ञान क्षय यावन्न न जरामरण क्षय न दुःख समुदय निरोध मार्ग न ज्ञानं न प्राप्ति तस्मात् ऋषारिपुत्र अप्राप्तित्वेन बोधिसत्त्वानां प्रज्ञापारमिताश्चित्य विहरति चित्तावरण चित्तावरणास्तित्वादत्रस्तो विपर्यास अतिक्रान्तो निष्ठ निर्वाणः त्रयद्वव्यवस्था सर्वबुद्ध प्रज्ञापारमिताश्चित्यानुत्तराम समय सम्बुद्धिमपि सम्बुद्धाः तस्माद् ज्ञातव्यं प्रज्ञापारमिता महामन्त्रम् मंत्र सम मंत्र सर्व दुख प्रशमन मंत्र सत्यमित्यत्वाद प्रज्ञापारमिता मुक्त मंत्र तत्यागते गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा तत्तागते गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा तत्तागते गते पारसंगते बोधि स्वाहा तस्मात् समाधिर्वितार्यवलिक्तेश्वरश्च बोधिसत्त्वस्य साधुकार्मदाद साधु साधु कुलपुत्रे तद् गम्भीरायाम प्रज्ञापारमितायाम चर्याम चर्तव्यं यथा त्वया निर्दिष्टमनुमोद्यते तथा गतिर्हद्भिः इदं वोच भगवान् आनन्दमनो आयुष्यमान् शारिपुत्रार्यवलिक्तेश्वरश्च बोधिसत्त्व सा च सर्ववति परिषत्सरे मानुष सदर्व गन्धर्वश्च लोकभगवतो भाषितमभिनन्दन इति प्रज्ञापारमिता हृदयसूत्रं समाप्तम्. Okay, so let's now start a session. So as I mentioned at the start of the session, so We are continuing with a series on Dharma at workplace, and we've already covered a few sessions as part of that discussion. So today we are going to discuss how we can manage conflicts at workplace. So before we proceed with the discussion, I'd just like to have a word on the general, the dominant paradigm that characterizes our present world. So we're all kind of working, living in an environment which is predominantly supported by features of capitalism, and competition is an essential aspect of whatever whatever in all spheres of our life. Competition is a predominant kind of aspect, very visible aspect, and it's through this force of competition. It's the dominant paradigm that describes our environment, whether it is the personal environment or the work environment. And because of the prevalence of these competitive energies and competitive forces that pervades our atmosphere, our environment, there are always forces that are a little opposing in nature, and that friction then leads to issues which then could take up the form of a conflict, and the conflict could be protracted, and it could lead to all kinds of problems if not dealt with in time and properly. So, as I said, competition is the kind of predominant aspect of our environment, whether at work or even in our personal environment, even in our households. Sometimes things get a little too competitive. But there's one group of people who believe that competition actually is very good. They kind of advocate, they make a case for competition. They say that competition is fundamental to human nature, and it is in a way more productive than cooperation or collaboration. It's more enjoyable, and it helps a person to build one's character. So, I mean, that's the position that a lot of people take, those people who support competition. But if you look at research, I mean, there's no data which supports this. In fact, there's a lot of data which proves that this is not the case, and all these positions that the people who are in favor of competition, all these positions kind of collapse. And their opinion, the people who come out with this research and who argue against competition, they say that this whole paradigm of competition is actually just a defense mechanism that's been built to evade our responsibility to look at alternate structures or frameworks that can promote more cooperation, collaboration, and through those frameworks of cooperation and collaboration, you can handle. And there's always some sort of destructive tension in the society, because any place which has more than two people, there will always be some sort of a destructive tension there. So, instead of having competitive framework to address those destructive tensions, we can have collaborative frameworks to address these kind of tensions in society. So, there are both these views. So, right now, you can see around you that this is the prevalent, more dominant kind of paradigm. But I don't know how it was in the past. You look at the spirit of academics, for example. Even in a very noble, virtuous kind of sphere like academics, there's so much competition. I mean, your value as a good academic is established by the number of research papers that you publish, and there's always this competition that you need to publish more research papers, and the quality of those research papers sometimes is not good enough. And you look at the paradigm that existed in the past. I don't know whether these kind of paradigms existed in the past. For example, some of the texts, the commentaries that we read by the Nalanda masters, some of these texts don't even have the name of the author mentioned in the text. They're beautiful commentaries, very insightful commentaries. And there's this debate amongst modern academicians and scholars as to who has composed this commentary. I mean, in the past, there was no practice of, I mean, of course, some texts, there's very clear evidence as to who the author was, the composer was, but there are a lot of texts where there's no clear evidence of who the composer was. And that leads to problems also, of course. But the point I'm trying to make is that in the past is more about, the idea, the motivation behind composing this text was so that it would benefit other people. It was not done out of the motivation that, okay, this adds to my tally of research papers and I will be appreciated, I will be acknowledged as a good academic or scholar. So, the paradigms that we used to, maybe we take it for granted. Maybe these did not exist in the past. I mean, it's a completely different kind of paradigm that describes a modern environment. What do you think is, was it different in the past? What's your opinion, Archana?
I think people were respected for their knowledge, irrespective of whether you have it published in a book or not. The status dependent on it.
Yeah.
That now has changed quite a bit.
Yeah. So it's definitely become more competitive in my opinions.
So now I mean, but still people are respected for their knowledge and scholarship, but it's a little super.
Yeah.
And we just get away by offering the coaching recommendation. That's all that we need to do.
Right.
So I think people really survived like they used to in the past. Yeah. Now they have to do other things. Have to either publish it or sell it or it's been advertised selling.
Correct. So it's not like the yes.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Actually.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking in the Buddhist framework, and maybe things were different because I have no idea. But I'm just talking about the human condition. I think competition, and certainly it's more pervasive now.
Yes.
Certainly it is so much more commodified, and but I think the human condition has always been that we prioritize ourselves over the others. I mean, like you look at the caste system, what is that? And different structures which have been there through past, some have been dismantled, some have. So I don't know if that we ever lived in a good. And I'm not talking spiritually, but I'm talking regular people. I don't know if we ever lived in a golden age where we thought of others, and now we have sort of disintegrated to thinking about others. I'm not.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's the point I was trying to going to make. In fact, it's not like conflicts did not exist in the past. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was going to come to. Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah, of course, personal conflicts, they've existed since time immemorial. Yeah. So you're right, even in the Buddha's time. Right. So there's this famous episode from the Buddha's life. In fact, some people say that episode is what triggered his departure from the kingdom, not the regular story that he hears. So there was this conflict between two neighboring kingdoms, the kingdom of Shakyas and the Kolyas, over a river water, like we have problems now between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So there was some conflict there, and there was the fear of an impending war between the two kingdoms. And the Buddha was asked to participate in the war, and he said, "No, this violence is not the way to handle it." And he chose to kind of the kingdom, renounce the kingdom. That's one interpretation. Of course, there's the more widely, the more popular version of why he left the kingdom. So it's true. I mean, even the past conflict existed, of course, but maybe it's a little more pervasive, as you said right now.
I think that today the population is greater.
Yes.
So you see more magnified.
Yes. Yes.
Now, I mean, it was like a duel. It was a political one-manship which you were trying to prove your superiority.
Yes.
In the part.
Yes.
Even if you see the composition of spiritual songs,
Yeah.
it is not so anonymous.
Yeah.
You will see the author, the composer's name is somewhere in that form.
Yeah.
So there was a one-manship even then.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
human beings are equal to greed, the sense of importance.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, that's always there. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Personal conflicts, of course. I don't think there's any reduction in the number.
Things like lok sangeet, it's not copyrighted.
Yeah.
So you have a whole lot of.
There is no confidence.
Yeah. So maybe it was the spirit of collaboration, cooperation, sharing was a little more visible in the past, maybe. Yeah. Okay, let's proceed then. Yeah. So okay, that kind of preface. Let's go and get to the main topic of our session. So conflict management of workplace. Of course, we've experienced conflicts in other environments also, personal environments also. But our focus will be on how to manage workplace conflicts, and I'll try to address this through 6 parts. So the first one, we'll try and define what a conflict is. Then we'll try and identify what kind of typical workplace conflicts we experience. And then the causes of those workplace conflicts. And then the crux and the core of the discussion. What are the different kinds of responses that we have in our and the fifth part will deal with how we can bring our training as a Buddhist practitioner into these conflict responses that we have. And then a more specific kind of discussion on there's something called the 3 frames of reference to deal with conflicts. So we'll go through these 6 points. So the first one, defining conflict. So do you have any definition for conflict? How would you define conflict? Any definition? Disagreement. Yes, yeah, disagreement between 2 individuals. It can be between groups.
It may or may not result in conflict.
Yeah, disagreement necessarily does not imply conflict. Yes, but it is an opposing viewpoint. Yes.
Block each other.
Yeah.
from doing the things that they're supposed to do.
Okay. Yeah. So that's an important point. Of course, there's a disagreement, which is the root. The disagreement, maybe it needs to be a little protracted. Yeah, and then it needs it kind of has to evolve into a situation where the parties involved in the conflict in that situation they feel threatened with regard to their wants, their needs, their interests, their views, maybe, as you mentioned. So that probably covers the definition. So it's basically some sort of a disagreement, a protracted disagreement, and to this disagreement, the parties who are involved, they perceive a threat to their needs, to their interests, their goals, their views. And yeah, of course, the disagreement has to be a little more serious. Trivial disagreements do not necessarily evolve into a conflict. And we could have a disagreement here, but on whether competition was as pervasive in the past as it is right now, but does not mean that it develops into a conflict. Yeah. So a serious disagreement probably is at the root, or a serious argument, typically a protracted one, and some sort of an incompatibility between the 2 positions. So if there is compatibility, then it manifests as a disagreement, but then the if this incompatibility is not serious, then over time it will just fade away. So a serious incompatibility between two or more opinions or worldviews or interests or principles. And usually as a consequence of this conflict, there is some hurt and anger because the privileges of the involved parties, they are threatened, or the worldview of the involved parties is questioned or threatened. So hurt or anger because privileges and worldviews are questioned or threatened. So this is kind of the definition of conflict. And there are, of course, external conflicts and internal conflicts also, right? So we need conflict need not always involve two people. It could be an internal conflict also. Yeah. So internal conflict would be a state of mind in which the person experiences a clash of opposing kind of feelings or needs. So there could be external conflicts as well as internal conflicts. So what are the causes? What are the typical workplace conflicts that we deal with? So most of us have some experience working in some.
Sometimes the employer wants the most
Yes.
and the employee wants the best.
Okay. So conflict that results from expectations or goals. Maybe the employer has a certain goal in his mind where the employee is working towards some other goals. So conflict that pertains to goals is or expectations. Yeah.
Performance related conflict.
Performance related conflicts. Yeah. So if the responsibilities that are assigned, they're not clear, and that that leads to your performance being assessed as being inferior to their expectations, then of course it leads to conflict. Yes.
Or like someone else
Competitive
is
conflicts.
Competitive.
right. Someone else is given a promotion and you feel
Yes.
this
Yes.
was clearly rightfully yours, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have data in
Correct.
yours to say that you can, but your manager will probably not be
Correct, yeah.
receptive of
Yes.
it.
Yes. So that's also
Mostly inner conflicts will come.
inner conflicts. Yes.
Ego conflict.
Ego conflicts, personality conflicts. Yes. That's true. Yeah. Inner conflicts. Yes. I think.
Yeah, mostly inner conflicts will come because, as you said, we will not directly go and ask, put our points, like in case somebody is getting much, deserving things than us. Mostly inside us, we will have conflicts, like why it is happening,
Yes.
why they are selling more work, or why, we are not given much, options to, like, for example, whatever we want, we are not giving, so.
All right.
So
So
then
yeah.
we not indulge in conflict, but just get away and find something else.
Okay, so just being resentful about the fact that your work is not being appreciated. That's an internal kind of discomfort, actually. I mean, may not result in a conflict. Conflict has internally you are taking two positions. That
Like a clash of values.
yes, yeah, clash of values.
Favoritism.
Favoritism, yes, yes, yes.
Somehow whenever the workplace is becoming more unpleasant place to be.
It is, yeah.
And it's not only done.
Yes,
It's a-
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there is this adoption of the US program.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the reason I started the session with this opinion. The competitive forces, they become so pervasive because work is so central to our lives. I mean, it defines what we define as our lives. Work is very central into it.
People are trying
And-
to make as much money as possible.
And we spend so much time.
At the age of 35,
Yeah, yeah.
that's like gold, retire at 35. Can you imagine? I mean, we're just starting our careers.
Right, right.
Around.
Correct. Yeah.
You'll burn out by 42 also to pay that, but because it's also the other stresses of life. Which, I don't think allow you to handle this one.
Right.
You know.
Correct. Okay, so
It's just become so unpleasant.
yeah. So I've listed some conflicts here, some 9 conflicts, 9 different kinds.
Management style also.
Yes, management style is one. True. Leadership style is. So there's conflict that arises from interdependent projects. So there's intergroup, interdepartment kind of projects where you have to rely on some other department. For example, the accounting department has to rely on reports provided by the sales department. And the sales department is not responsive to the requests of the accounting department. Then the accounting department's work becomes very difficult. So there's a conflict that arises because of this. So interdependency leads to conflicts. Then conflict pertaining to goals. So departments may not actually go along if they don't have shared goals. And each department is kind of operating in their own respective silos, and each one is prioritizing their specific goals. So because of that, it could lead to conflict. So conflict pertaining to goals. Then, as you said, conflicts arising from incompatible leadership styles. So you could have a boss who is very hands-off, very relaxed, very warm to your feedback. And then you get used to his working style, his leadership style, and then he's replaced with another manager who is very kind of intrusive, micromanages everything, and wants to kind of dictate everything to you. That then really that creates a different kind of tension, and that becomes difficult for you to handle, and it can evolve into a conflict. So conflicts arising from incompatible leadership styles. So everybody reacts differently to different leadership styles. Some leaders are bold and charismatic, where some like to micromanage, as I said. Others are laid back, and some are very technical and kind of tend to lead by the book. So very strict about the rules that are specified, to make no exceptions. So these are all different kinds of leadership styles, and you have to kind of adapt yourself to these different leadership styles. Sometimes adapting becomes a little difficult, and that leads to some conflict. Then incompatible work styles. So you could have a colleague of yours, you're working on the same project, but that colleague works to prefers to work alone, but the project requires you to work in a group and exchange ideas. That could lead to a conflict. So some people prefer working in groups, some prefer working alone. Some people need kind of continuous guidance, while others are okay. The first guidance that they get, they don't need any kind of extra direction. So again, depending on their style of working, it could potentially create a conflict. Some people, work better under pressure, while some really panic, and they start panicking, and they're very unproductive under pressure. So all these kind of work styles also lead to conflicts if there's incompatibility, and conflicts that arise out of resource constraints, a big reason. So you have constraints of budget, you have constraints of time, you have constraints in terms of what the number of support staff that you have. So a peer of yours seems to be getting better time, better money support, better staff support, maybe an extended deadline timeline, and you kind of start resenting that, and then that leads to a conflict between you and the peer, and maybe even between you and the boss, something that might be related to.
It's 80-20 thing, like 20% of the people do 80%.
Yes, yeah.
Percent of them make more noise and
Correct, yeah.
appears in
Yeah. Yeah. So then personality conflicts that Archana brought up, so differences in behavior and the general attitude of people, and that can lead to conflict. Some people are more optimistic, some are more pessimistic about life. I mean, generally, even those kind of differences in attitude can lead to conflicts. Then there's conflicts that arise from incompatible ideologies or value systems. So again, a big problem. Maybe your boss has a very different take on work-life balance.
I had one boss who used to come back around.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, and what ideologies, what value systems you prescribe to. that could lead to conflicts. So that's one of the conflicts that you see at a workplace. Then there are conflicts that come out of discrimination, any kind of harassment or discrimination going on due to age, maybe due to race, ethnicity, gender, that could lead to conflicts.
People do unconsciously also.
Yes,
It's not always deliberate.
yes, it happens. Yeah, it's subtle at times. Yeah, maybe the person who is engaging in it also doesn't realize that he's doing it. Yeah. And then there's conflicts that arise out of disagreement between two parties about the efficiency or the efficacy of a solution that's been proposed, a creative solution that is proposed. So creative conflicts, which is a good thing, because that kind of conflict then leads to the best solution being, if handled properly, of course. If not, then of course it will also lead to a lot of dissipative
But
energies.
something I find is like the basic communication itself is not as good. So whatever, there can be a conflict just because of that.
Yes. So if your goals, your responsibilities are not communicated properly, then it does lead to conflicts. So these are some of the typical workplace conflicts that I could identify. Maybe there are more that you can think of. So what are the causes of workplace conflicts? What are the causes? So one big cause, of course, that we saw is competition for resources. So there's always a constraint of time, deadlines are tight, constraint on resources, the budget that your group is allotted, other resources, manpower resources. Yeah. So
I think it's the capitalist system that we all have subscribed to and we believe is the best for all of us, for humanity. I think that sort of, because then people are not valued, people's potentials, people's different, like you said, work styles and stuff is not valued.
yes,
It's the profit and the shareholder value, which is king. And when
Yes.
you have that goal, which is, in my opinion, questionable,
Yes.
then obviously practices and everything
Yes.
will start getting questioned.
absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, profit and greed of office positions, office.
Yeah,
it's a
lack of alignment of the goals and.
Correct. Yeah. So that so yeah, unclear kind of definition of the responsibilities and goals. That is one cause. Competition for resources, time, money, materials, equipment, skill sets. These are all finite resources. We do not have access to infinite resources. We have to manage with these kind of limited resources, and hence there is always competition for them. And because there is competition, it can trigger a conflict sometimes. Unclear responsibilities. So as Archana was mentioning, that some team members will feel that they do all the work, they do all the they do all the hard, heavy lifting work, but it's somebody else who walks away with the credit. So there's always this kind of situation in any group, and the person who's not getting credit for the work then develops some sort of resentment in his mind stream, and then that evolves into conflict. So we always resent those who seem to have fewer responsibilities. And then blame and frustration can lead to conflicts. Blame and frustration typically arises out of duplicated work and unfinished tasks. And then different interests, as you mentioned, people, groups, they focus on personal and departmental goals, which may be in conflict, which may be in variance with the organizational goals. And then that leads to all kinds of conflicts. So these are the typical causes for workplace conflicts. So in our scriptures, the Buddha has also kind of mentioned the cause for conflicts. So you're all aware of the 12 links of dependent origination, right? So there's this sutra called the Mahanidana Sutra, or the Great Causes Sutra. And there, of course, he presents the 12 links. The 12 link, the presentation is essentially to describe the process of being bonded in this samsara through birth, this cycle of birth, death, and then rebirth. how that process works. So it starts with ignorance, the first link, then compositional factors, and then consciousness, then name and form, and then the spheres, the sense spheres. And through sense spheres, you develop contact with the external world. Contact leads to some feeling, and the feeling leads to craving and then grasping. Grasping leads to becoming, becoming leads to birth, and birth leads to aging and death. So it just takes off, just kind of elaborates when he's describing the link of craving. Says that craving, of course, is dependent on feeling. And then there's grasping, which is dependent on craving. So the ninth link is dependent on the eighth link, which is the link of craving. And because of grasping, then you develop the wish to acquire something, and that leads to acquisition. So acquisition is dependent on grasping. And acquisition leads to ascertainment. So now I'm in possession of this thing that I desire or a crave. So ascertainment is dependent on acquisition. And now that you've acquired that thing, you yes, you want to protect it. You desire the pleasure that you derive out of possessing it. You desire, you want to hold on to the passion, that the pleasure that accrues from your possession of that thing. So there's desire and passion. So that desire and passion comes from ascertainment. And this desire and passion then leads to what is called attachment. And then attachment leads to possessiveness, as you said. And you're possessive of these things that you have. And because of this possessiveness, you develop what is called stinginess or miserliness. You don't want to share it with anyone. And this stinginess leads to defensiveness. And it is this defensiveness which then, dependent on this defensiveness, arises various kinds of evil, various kinds of unskillful, unwholesome actions, like taking up sticks and knives. It results in conflicts, it results in quarrels, it results in disputes, accusations, divisive speech, and lies. So, so that's the cycle that he is elaborated on. So craving, grasping, of course, part of the main cycle, the 12 links. But then grasping leads to what? It leads to acquisition. Acquisition leads to ascertainment. Ascertainment leads to desire and passion. Desire and passion leads to possessiveness. Possessiveness leads to stinginess. Stinginess leads to defensiveness. And defensiveness triggers conflicts. So now, maybe this explanation holds for material things. Also to power, maybe, yes. But what about can you be? We've seen that conflicts can arise due to incompatible value systems, incompatible ideals. So, can this description describe that? Explain that? I mean, can you be possessive about an ideal?
Yeah.
Yeah. How is it?
Will you identify with that idea?
Ideal, I said, ideal value.
Yes, because it's something that is important to you. You identify with it. And so when it is threatened, you feel like you are being threatened. If someone's not willing to uphold that or help you uphold it, then you feel that it is you that is being threatened.
Well, like you have the Gandhi versus.
You're right. Okay. No, but possessiveness specifically. You're defensive about it. Okay. Possessiveness. Possessiveness means you don't want to share it with someone else, right?
Share.
How do you understand possessiveness? How do you?
You identify very closely. So, and there is also this thing of resenting anything else.
That's
So it's not this resentment.
yeah. So resentment is part of the defensiveness.
And sometimes it is how historically you think that there injustice handed out
Yes.
to these followers. So
Right. So yeah, it's point that we'll have to explore a little more. Uh, this explanation, of course, works well with the material things, but we'll have to think a little more about how one can be possessive about the softer
It
things.
makes you close mind,
Uh-huh.
possessiveness,
Close mind.
close minded. That
Mhm.
means not willing to
Share.
share.
Okay. Anyways, let's
if you want to do well for Ranadikas,
Ah.
even at the expense of others.
Okay. Yeah, in that sense, maybe, yeah. Yeah. So you're possessive of the Kannada lineage, the Kannadiga lineage, the heritage. Okay, maybe in that sense you can, yeah, think about it. Yeah. But then possessiveness would lead to stinginess also, right? Okay. So anyways, let's maybe we can think about it and see how possessiveness, how we can possessive of softer things like ideas or ideals or values. So this is the presentation in one of the sutras, the Mahanidana Sutras that it mentioned. So these explain the causes of conflict. So now let's come to the core of our discussion, the different kinds of responses that we have to deal with conflicts. So maybe we'll break for some time before we take up this discussion. Maybe 5. Yeah. Okay. It's okay. We can break. So we'll take this up after the break. Conflict responses we can take up after the break. Okay. 10 minutes break. Okay, so
Repeat those steps you talked about, like grasping everything.
okay, so craving and grasping of position, and grasping will lead to acquisition, right? You want to possess acquisition, then ascertainment.
So what is that?
Ascertainment, like you, the state of mind is, oh, now I own it.
Oh,
Yeah. You are asserting your possession of that thing. That completes the act of acquiring. It's my own now. Yeah. And then ascertainment leads to desire and passion. So the word is chanda, chanda and rag in Sanskrit. So I don't know whether desire would be the best translation, but yeah. You kind of get used to the pleasures coming from that object.
And what?
Rag,
Ram.
rag. Rag means, I mean, it's translated as attachment in some cases. It's translated as desire in some cases. Typically, in colloquial spoken Hindi, rag means anger actually, or Marathi it becomes anger.
Marathi it
It's
is.
anger, but rag actually is attachment or an aspect of attachment. Here it is translated as passion. And then desire and passion leads to attachment, tanha, trishna.
Oh.
And then attachment leads to possessiveness. Possessiveness leads to stinginess or miserliness. And stinginess then leads to defensiveness. And defensiveness then triggers all the conflict that we experience. Okay, so what are the typical conflict responses that we exhibit? Any suggestions?
For resident.
Yeah, what is our immediate kind of
Okay.
reaction? What is our
Reaction is like protection and
yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a very important point that you raised. I mean, that's something that we're going to address. So the typical responses, some people list them as 5, some list them as 4, but they can all be collapsed into 3 typical responses. The first one is avoidance. The second one is accommodation. And the third one is aggressive competition. Yeah. So the first one, avoidance. So we have this impulse to kind of withdraw, walk away from the unpleasant situation, and just disappear and just pretend that it does not exist. You don't want to stir the pot in a sense. So just walk away, disappear. So in some situations, of course, the conflict, the issues that are driving the conflict may not concern us. In that situation, it's better to kind of just steer clear of the situation. Yeah. Other times, you kind of believe that the conflict will just dissipate over time, and it's best to be kind of kept at a distance. So even there, you kind of just avoid the conflict and just walk away. So in some situations, as I just mentioned, it could be a skillful response, avoidance of the conflict, but not on all situations. If you have this compulsive tendency, the dominant kind of tendency is your habitual strategy is to avoid a conflict, then it leads to problems. Or what kind of problems can you think about? Problems of being a habitual avoider. Yes, yeah. So it leads to the problem just growing out of proportion to a stage where you don't have any other option but to walk away then. It really creates a mess for you. So that's one problem with the strategy. Any other? Resentment builds up in your mind stream. Yeah, you're right. Yes, yes.
desire of wanting more and more.
Uh-huh.
Something bigger, then I'll be happy.
Yes.
Then I want another big house, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And if that breaks the
Yes.
expectations, desire.
Right.
Desire is one.
Correct. Yeah. So the habitual strategy of avoidance, it can be counterproductive, and you tend to be non-committal. You get labeled as being non-committal then. Your peers, your subordinates, your colleagues, your superiors, they see you as being non-committal, evasive, unnecessarily.
They won't stand by you.
Yes, yeah. You are identified as being somebody who is excessively cautious, also political. Yeah. You also tend to be identified as somebody who hedges all the time. He's kind of always calculating, a sidestepper. So there are lots of downsides, of course, as Archana mentioned. It might lead to a situation where you let the problem grow out of proportion to a stage where the only option is but to walk away. There's no other option. The other problem with this strategy of avoidance is that every time there's a new challenge that comes your way, you face a new challenge, and you fail to make a contribution to resolving that conflict because you fear that there could be a pushback to your ideas. And then that leads to your contribution not being recognized. I mean, eventually it will lead to a stage where the subordinates, the peers will not value your contributions in the future also. And then you will develop this resentment in your mind. Why is it that my contribution is not being valued? It's because you've been avoiding contributing positively. So avoidance has habitual avoidance has these problems. Of course, avoidance can be a skillful strategy in some situations, but not in all situations. So that's one typical response. The second one I mentioned is accommodating. So a subset of this strategy is compromising. So those of us who exhibit this as our dominant strategy, we are prone to be excessively cooperative. And we have this tendency to not stand up for ourselves. And our dominant concern is to ensure that we keep everybody happy. So we're not invisible as the avoider is. The avoider becomes invisible when conflict manifests. But in the case of a person who is an accommodator, he kind of he's there, he's making some contributions, but all his contributions are driven by this desire to keep everybody happy. So that is the second kind of strategy. And of course, again, this is also valued. It's a valid strategy in a lot of situations, especially in work situations when you're dealing with your boss or superiors. If you have this as your dominant strategy, it does have its benefits. So you respond positively to your superiors, listen to the opinions that they provide you. So you're identified as somebody who is good to work with, easy to work with. That has its own positive effects. Even in personal lives, with your partner, if you have this dominant strategy of accommodating your partner in a conflict situation, then you're identified as somebody who is flexible and willing to adapt. And even that leads to creating a positive vibe in the interaction. And that's also appreciated. So it does have its positive effects. But again, the other side, being a habitual accommodator, if that is your habitual strategy, accommodation becomes your habitual strategy. Again, it leads to problems. So what?
Can't make everyone happy.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
not possible.
very, very right. Very. Sorry?
Stems from a need to be light.
Light, yes,
And
absolutely.
it
Yeah.
creates discomfort within you.
Sorry?
So
Yeah.
you're always compromising.
Yeah.
It creates a discomfort within you.
Absolutely, yeah. So you lose the sense of your self-worth also. It gets compromised a little bit. You're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. As Archana mentioned, one of the most serious problems of this strategy is that you want to please everyone, but then let's say there are too many people to please, and then you're in a dilemma: who to please? Yeah, you can't please everyone. Then who to please becomes a problem for you. So it creates this problem. You're unsure.
Try that, nobody will let you.
Yeah, you try that. Yeah. So the disadvantages of being a habitual accommodator, you lose a sense of self-worth, as Sadhana mentioned. And then over a period of time, you also become resentful, and inevitably your contributions, they're not acknowledged. Somebody else gets the credit for your work. Then you start resenting that fact. And over a period of time, of course, you start losing your credibility because you don't take the risk of giving your own opinion. You're trying to accommodate others. You're trying to support other people's opinions. Your opinion does not come through. So sometimes you do have to have the courage to disagree with what is being proposed. And in fact, in a lot of situations, that is a better strategy. It's a more honest strategy, especially when you're trying to maintain a relationship or something. You have to have the courage to disagree at times. People, the other party will take you more seriously. Otherwise, you forever kind of engage in this strategy of accommodating. You have this compulsion to hold on to this strategy, then becomes a liability for you. And one of the major problems that Archana mentioned, there's this dilemma sometimes that there are too many people that you need to please, and who to please, who to support. That becomes an issue. So that's the second strategy, accommodating, and habitual accommodation has its own drawbacks. So we just looked at those drawbacks. So the third strategy, competition. So a person who has this as the dominant trait has this instinctive response to push back when he is faced with a conflict. And he has this desire to assert himself or herself, has no problems with his will to dominate. He sees conflict as an opportunity to prevail. He wants to assert himself. Again, it's not a bad strategy. Assertiveness is a positive trait, especially when yeah.
So why do people usually choose consultations that are easy and they know they can do it, but not the ones that is like it's hard work, their night study. But where some people take understand not of them choose the easy consultation.
Yeah, it's something that they mentioned. I mean, it comes out of this instinct to protect your own interests. Yeah, so you choose your fights. Yeah, it's mostly coming from this instinct to protect oneself. You make an assessment. Okay, in this situation, uh, my sorry. Yes, yes. So my goals will be compromised, my comfort will be compromised. Then you stay away from it. Somewhere else, you see that there's benefit in being involved in this competition. Then chooses to get involved in that competition. So assertiveness is a positive trait, and it's necessary for leadership. If you're in leadership positions, then you have to be assertive, and you have to. I mean, this.
It can become aggressive.
Yeah, so that will come too, but let's look at the positive sides first. So we have to be able to say no. We can't be always in this. We can't be in this mode where we're trying to please everyone all the time. So we can't predicate all our important decisions on whether others will be happy or not. So we need to have that trait of assertiveness. But yeah, habitual assertiveness, habitual aggression, that becomes an issue. So what are the problems with that as your dominant strategy? Habitual aggression.
Basically, you are not,
Yes.
and you will not get the benefit of their knowledge.
Yeah. Right. Correct.
It's not showing the leadership quality.
Uh-huh. Can you elaborate a little bit?
So as a leader, you want to go next level alone. So which is like a leadership position. So we need to be inclusive approach. Which
Yes. Yeah. You're compromising.
we should take all the opinions and work together.
Yes.
Take decision like that.
Yes.
Because project
You need to be inclusive is something, yeah, Archana also kind of referred to. So this habitual aggression, it's kind of a destructive strategy, habitual, compulsive aggression. Of course, it comes out of this instinct to protect our ego, protect our interests, and to secure our place in the world. Yes.
They know that they respect what you're saying and
Yeah.
put up.
Yeah, creatively also the situation gets compromised because nobody else wants to contribute. Yours is the dominant opinion. Nobody wants, you know that even if I say something, it will not be valued. Of course, it creates isolation and loneliness for the person who's exhibiting this excessive aggression. And it wears everybody over time. So people get tired with this kind of habitual aggression. So these are the downsides of habitual aggression.
Is it a form of self-cherishing?
Yeah, it is definitely a form of self-cherishing. So yeah, it's an important point that you raise. We'll try to address that in how to modulate these dominant strategies. We'll see how we can bring in our training to make these a little more positive. Yeah. So all these different conflict responses that we have, everybody has a combination of these responses. There's no, I mean, everybody has a dominant trait. It's driven by the dominant personality trait. I think the conflict strategy that he or she deploys is driven by the personality that that person has. But all of us will have a combination of these responses. If you look at a set of different kinds of conflicts that you've been part of.
And many times that our response is situation driven.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they're context driven. Yeah, you're right. So you're right. So most of us have a combination of responses, and they're varied, and they're driven by context. They're dependent on a lot of different factors. One is context, as you mentioned. Then roles. What kind of role you are in. So, for example, a doctor can have, competitive, aggressive aggression cannot be a dominant trait for a doctor. He needs to be accommodating, yeah, or a nurse for that matter needs to be accommodating. That needs to be the dominant strategy. For a lawyer, what would be suitable conflict strategy? He needs to win an argument. Yeah. He has to be competitive. Yeah. He has to be competitive. Airline hostess stewardess again accommodating. What about a broker, stockbroker, stock trader? Yeah, he has to be very competitive. I mean, he has to take risk. He has to have the willingness to take risks. He can't be just deliberating on, okay, I need to kind of soften it, hedge it. Sorry?
They need a speed of this.
Yes, absolutely. They can't be hedging forever. Of course, hedging is a trading strategy that traders use. But again, that has to be very quick. And even hedging strategies can be. So, stock trader would need to be competitive. What about diplomats and bureaucrats?
Avoidance and
Yeah, avoidance. Yeah, avoidance and accommodation. Yeah, bureaucrats mostly avoidance. Yeah, even diplomats avoid them. They say a lot without meaning anything. You look at the statements that some of the foreign ministers they give out. They go on and go on and on and on, but there's absolutely no substance in what they're saying. Sales people.
Many times they're in a diffuse the situation
Yes.
role.
Yeah,
I think.
correct. Yeah.
You know, avoid stuff to blow up to war levels. Or
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
It's a useful thing.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a useful strategy, particularly.
Food and time. Some substance is not food time.
There's no truth. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Salespeople, salespersons, same. Yeah. So they need to be accommodating us. Yeah.
No,
and competition.
That's-
Salespeople, aggression.
You need aggression.
You need to lure the other person into buying your stuff, right?
Competitions with regard to other people pitching for the same.
Yeah, but generally, I think his main activity is selling to other people, right? So when he is engaged in that activity, he has to lure people. He has to seduce people. He has to make them believe that okay, this is the best product. That, yeah.
Is it also related to being greedy?
Yeah. All of these things, I mean, greed, avarice, envy is at the root of our responses. So, yeah, it is. What about ordained monks like us? What would be a good strategy for us?
No expectation.
Ah,
I think they would try to have the conflict in the first place.
yes. But yeah, we also kind of.
They need to, I mean, they probably see conflict in the people this.
Yeah, a debate is, I am teeming with conflict. Yeah, creative conflicts. The debate court,
Oh, there you can be
competitive.
Primary disorders. In part, you have law.
Right. Mhm.
For
Yeah.
a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for you, it's none of these.
None of these three, no dominant strategy.
No, but there is a vow, right?
Yes.
To not creating conflict.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know.
No, I mean, you're not actively involved in creating the conflict, but conflicts do manifest, right? So in that situation, then what could be a useful strategy? And that's maybe a combination of all these. There are also some worldly activities that we have to engage in. So. What about law enforcement people? Aggression is necessary for them. Yeah. So yeah, depending on what role you are in, your dominant strategy could be different. Conflict styles, conflict responses are also dependent on culture and backgrounds. They vary from culture to culture. Can you give me an example of how? More aggressive.
It is more subdued, like in the Far East, they are a little more subdued.
Yes.
They are a little more aggressive.
Yeah.
But you can just say a conflict, basically it's a one-man show.
Mm.
making yourself, if you feel more important,
Mhm.
let
Yes.
you go.
Yeah.
And when you feel threatened, this conflict comes into
Yes. Yes.
be
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. So, some cultures are more direct in their communication. So, you take the example of relationships and how conflicts in relationships are handled in the Indian culture, as opposed to how they're dealt with in Western culture. Uh, in marriage, for example, if there are conflicts in the marriage in the Indian setup, everybody gets involved.
Yeah, the family.
So, I mean, the general tendency is to diffuse it. Elders get involved, and other people get involved, and there's a lot of behind the scene maneuvering of the situation to make sure that it is diffused. So there's no direct communication, so to say. There's no upfront communication, so to say. So uh, the response that helps you navigate that kind of a conflict is very different in the Eastern cultures as opposed to in the Western culture. So yeah. So any other
But I
example?
think that's because of the way
Yes. Yes.
They were more at the society, family.
Right.
Than. But people, when they get together on their own,
Yeah.
they resolve their conflicts by themselves.
Right. Okay.
They will not go to the family.
But even when they're resolving it by themselves, I mean, there's a lot of behind the scene kind of effort to diffuse it. Whereas maybe in the Western culture, it's a little more upfront.
Behind the scene, actually, no, they are adding fuel to the fire many times.
Basically, they try to maintain the relationship at
Okay.
any cost.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dominant.
I'll tell you one interesting story, my own story.
Mm.
There is a temple is there where there are two sections of the acharyas.
Mm.
So this section want one way of conveying the mantras.
Mm.
They want other way.
Mm.
So they what the government officer decided is you can write it in paper and ask some child to take one paper.
Draw a lot.
So
Yeah.
which one is you want they can proceed.
Okay.
It's like an idea.
So that's the way to resolve the conflict. It's a third person kind of objective perspective to resolve the
There
conflict
is some
between two.
leadership.
So there's the I don't know whether it's a valid way to mediate, but that possibility is there in that conflict situation. But in a lot of conflict situation, that possibility may not be there. No.
So here, as far as I'm saying, if you get married also, if you choose to remain single, join a Buddhist monastery or Hindu,
Yeah.
for myself, my aunt says because she's getting old, I have to get married because I have my lesson, get married because I'm getting old. And I told my father, but the father was like, it's okay, aunt, it's okay. Later on, I was like, I felt it like a joke. I was like, okay, she's older, she's expressing. I do respect her. It's okay.
Okay, so we have a combination of responses. We may have a dominant strategy, but usually it's a combination of these three different kinds of styles of responding to a conflict situation that we deploy. So we looked at the three dominant strategies, and we looked at the problems that compulsive avoidance, compulsive accommodation, and compulsive aggression they create. So we need to kind of work out ways how to soften the impact of these compulsive tendencies. So we'll discuss that in a moment. So the three styles of avoidance, accommodation, and competition aggression, if they're uh, deployed without proper knowledge of the situation, without being mindful about the risks, the problems, the flaws, and these conflict responses can lead to a lot of suffering. They actually become the cause that supports suffering. So, as we had seen, the competitive strategy creates a deeper sense of loneliness and separation. for the person who deploys it as the dominant strategy. For a person who deploys accommodation as the dominant strategy, that style is essentially motivated by a lack of confidence, and internally it leads to this problem. The person loses some self-worth. Yeah. So because he feels insufficient. Insufficient specifically when he's not placating others. And then compulsive avoidance, that has this problem that there could be an expensive escalation of the problems, as Akshay had mentioned. It comes to a stage where there's no way you can resolve it but to walk away from the conflict. And also the problem that you're not valued by your peers and subordinates or superiors. So while there is this negative side to all these three strategies, there's also positive potential when our response is mindful and perceptive. So how do we make our responses mindful and perceptive? We have to understand that our responses are essentially driven by our ego, our reservations, or prejudices, or biases, and self-centrism, as self-cherishing, as Madhvi had just mentioned. So how do we modulate this? How do we subdue these? And then show a willingness to engage with those conflict situations, show a willingness to make mistakes, and rather than having a knee-jerk reaction to these conflict situations, show a willingness to engage with them, show a willingness to make mistakes, and rather than just trying to either walk away, avoid, or accommodate to minimize our vulnerability, you try and evolve some sort of mechanism to deal with these. So the best way to do that is to be more mindful and perceptive about the conflict situation. So how do you become more mindful and perceptive about these situations? So there are, in order to become a little more perceptive or mindful of these conflict situations, see, most of the conflict situations, of course, there are resources that we can rely on to diffuse the conflict situation. But essentially, the impetus, the force, the major force to diffuse those situations will come from our own side. So self-mediation becomes the most important parameter to diffuse the conflicts. So what is the best way to self-mediate these conflicts? How do we use self-mediation to mitigate conflicts? So that's what we're going to see now. So before we understand how to design a proper self-mediation response, let's understand that any conflict situation, there are three different kinds of frames of references or perspectives that provide intelligence about the conflict situation. We need intelligence to design a defense mechanism or design a response to any conflict situation. And that intelligence comes from three different perspectives. There's the first person perspective, there's the second person perspective, and then there's an objective third person perspective. So we made the reference to the third person objective. I don't know whether it can be termed objective, but a third person perspective to diffuse a situation. So what is a first person frame of reference? Your perspective, you're involved in a conflict, the I perspective. So I see the situation like this. This is how the situation has developed. I think you should be more accommodating. I think you should be more aware of the fact that my career is getting stagnated because of your actions. So the I perspective. So in a conflict, it's always important that you give the opportunity for your counterpart in the conflict to present his I perspective also. That the fact that you're willing to acknowledge his I perspective, that itself kind of diffuses the situation. Yeah, it brings us soothing effect on the situation. So the first person perspective is important. But we'll also see how it can also become a problem and what are the sources that leads to the first person perspective becoming a problem. And then there's the third person perspective or third person frame of reference. So this is the objective truth. And it includes facts, evidence, proof, data, scientific findings, legal findings, instruments. And also in a lot of situations, it refers to the opinion of an unbiased, objective outside observer. So both parties in the conflict, they identify somebody as an objective, neutral observer. So that person then brings in the third person perspective on this conflict. So essentially, the third person frame of reference refers to the role of witnesses. It facilitates contribution from the witnesses side. Very important and would be probably the best provider of intelligence to diffuse the conflict. But in most situations, you do not have access to a third person frame of reference. If we had it, I mean, that would be the best source of intelligence to diffuse the conflict situation. So rarely does a third person perspective alone by itself resolve a dispute. So this is the third person perspective, and then there's the second person frame of reference. Yeah. So this is the lies within the domain of we, both the I and you. So you, from your side, you start thinking about the situation from the perspective of the other party, and the other party also reciprocates with the same perspective. So this leads to contribution or identification of shared beliefs, shared interests. Very important. If you are able to identify shared interests, then that becomes the most useful piece of intelligence that can help you diffuse the situation, diffuse the conflict. So the domain of shared beliefs, shared cultural values. For example, Archana mentioned this, that and you'd be able to identify with a fellow Kannadika, both of you are involved in a conflict, some personal conflict, but through a discussion you realize that both of you as fellow Kannadikas, you have preservation of the Kannadiga literature and Kannada culture as a shared interest, and use that as a basis to then diffuse the conflict. You can use that. So the space of shared beliefs, the space of culture, shared cultural values, agreements and commitments. So in a relationship, you make commitments, and so between teacher and disciple, teacher and student, between two partners, between superior and a subordinate, there's always some sort of an agreement that you've had before the conflict started. And you can use that agreement to diffuse the situation. And it also provides the possibility of play for compassion and empathy. So empathy is the you perspective, the we perspective. Yeah. So you apprehend the feelings of others. And the more you bring this empathetic perspective into understanding the conflict situation, the more useful it will be to diffuse the situation. It's a very important tool. So this is the second person frame of reference. And conflict resolution and mediation are ultimately second person enterprises. They're second person enterprises. The resolution kind of emerges out of the second person frame of reference. So it provides this, so there's this interplay, there's the my truth, the first person frame of reference. Then there's the truth, the third person objective truth, third person frame of reference. And then there's the our truth. So any resolution of a conflict situation will have to involve an interplay of all these truths, the my truth, the our truth, and the truth, the objective truth. So which one is more dominant will be decided by the situation. But it's usually our truth that will help you diffuse the conflict situation. So, yes.
In case of solving the conflict, what if one person is calm and is ready to listen? Whereas the other person is like, let's sit down. But if the other person doesn't agree, and he just wants to listen, that you.
Yeah, you'll have to kind of be tactful about it, you'll let it unfold. It's possible that the person starts off as being aggressive initially, but you are accommodating from your side. You try to kind of bring in the soothing effect by listening to him. Or the mere fact that you're willing to listen to him, acknowledge his perspective, automatically kind of brings down the aggressive energy. And gradually he'll also be willing to reciprocate, and he'll also then want to hear out your perspective of things. Usually that happens. If,
You know, when somebody very volatile, it seems to make more sense, just to let him breathe or something.
yeah,
Then revisit the territory and maybe start from a point of agreement.
correct.
And
Yeah,
then, make
correct,
your point.
correct. Yeah, you're right. I mean, conflicts are usually triggered by this survival mechanism that we have.
Like a fight.
Yeah. So the person who's being aggressive also is kind of deploying his survival mechanism, and there's this instinct to protect himself first. Yeah. So yeah, any conflict kind of arises out of fear or
Yeah.
insecurity. Yeah. So what are the different kinds of fears that we can identify that leads to conflicts?
Fear of losing something.
Yeah.
Or losing your power.
Correct, yeah. So fear of losing your power, uh, fear of losing your material possessions. Yes. Any other fear that you have?
Feeling that to be dominated by the will.
Insecurity.
Insecurity. Yes. Any other?
Usually take threatened.
Threatened. Yeah. So threatened. Yeah. So there are threats to.
Fear of life.
Yes, yes. So threat of your physical safety is an important threat that you respond to. Then there's a threat to your relationships. Yeah. So often we shy away or avoid conflicts because we are afraid of hurting somebody, hurting the other person, and damaging our relationship. So there's the threat to our relationship that we perceive. Then there's the threat to our sense of belonging. Usually we are part of some group, and because of the conflict, we fear that it creates the possibility that we may be expelled from the group. So there's this threat to our sense of belonging to some of our groups. Then there's the threat to our identity or ego. So, because of this threat usually manifests because suddenly it's got loud here. I think that was the trick. You need to hit it. Yeah. You will have to probably turn down the game a bit.
Should be burned down.
Yeah. So there's a threat to our identity or ego, and usually how this manifests comes about is that we feel that you don't want to be humiliated or embarrassed. You don't want to feel vulnerable or exposed because of this perception of this threat. Then there's threat to what we value, as Archana mentioned. In many of our conflicts, we are trying to protect our material possessions. We're also trying to protect our values, ideas, our beliefs of the world. And then there's also a threat of unnecessary commitments. There's this sometimes. I'll give you an example. I mean, you see an old road accident. There's an internal conflict that arises in you. There's the good Samaritan part of you, and there's the pragmatic you. So there's a conflict between the pragmatic you and the Samaritan, the good Samaritan in you. The good Samaritan says that you should go help maybe report to the police, take the person to the hospital or whatever. But the pragmatic use is that, oh, you get involved, you'll be dragged to the police station, and there'll be unnecessary commitment from your side. You'll have to spend a lot of time and energy on this. So there's that internal conflict also. So these are all different kinds of threat that manifest in the form of a conflict later on. So you're right, because conflicts arise out of this threats, out of a sense of fear, out of this survival instinct that we have, we should always kind of try and slow down our response to it. And then let the feelings kind of evolve, but stay present in the conflict, not run away, just become invisible. Maybe tolerate the upsurge of the energy, maybe negative in that state. Just deal with it, tolerate the upsurge of the negative energy in that situation. So the three frames of reference, so how can we make them more effective? Maybe infuse those strategies, those responses with some of the things that we've trained ourselves in. So what are the tools that we have in our armor that we can use to better handle conflicts? So Madhvi had mentioned self-cherishing. So the opposite of it, other cherishing, is a tool that we can deploy to modulate our responses. What are the other tools that we have in the response?
Perspective of the other one.
Okay, empathy, compassion,
Patience, just hold
patience,
your
yes,
hand,
yes, patience, tolerance. We've seen that.
slow
In,
response.
yes. Anything else?
There are some personalities against whom you just cannot win.
Okay.
So it's best to just leave it alone.
Right. Okay.
That's a good strategy.
Okay. So avoidance is a strategy. Yes, true. Yeah, avoidance is a strategy. Yeah.
Pushing ourselves to listen, to face.
Yes, listening is refining our second person perspective.
And you can give small wins.
Small wins, yes, absolutely. So the other cherishing that Madhavi was referring to.
When
Yeah.
you think of ultimate goal.
Huh?
The ultimate goal.
Ultimate goal.
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you are actually able to give up ourselves for resolving issue, so that, for example, if I accept others' point of view, then the actual goal can be satisfied. Then I will accept that, because ultimately that actual goal is achieved.
Yes.
Getting achieved. Instead of going with
Okay.
one-
So being aware, being mindful about the larger good. So collaborating to ensure that you're not fighting for a small pie, collaborating to ensure that the pie is big enough.
Like
So
a
both of us,
coalition.
sorry,
Like a coalition.
coalition, yes, yeah, that's a good example, yeah. So collaboration is a good strategy, yeah. Okay, so the first person perspective, in order to make it more potent, yes. What's the question? Can you read out on the chat?
Sure. I'll ask her to first.
Okay, yeah. So the first person frame of reference, to make it more healthy, we'll wind up this thing, and maybe 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. So the healthy first person frame of reference, you need to be mindful of the excessive self-protection instinct that we have. Yeah. So when we are in a situation, in a conflict situation, and we have to voice our I perspective, the first person perspective, and there are always some obstacles to our ability to voice our I perspective with clarity, with energy, with warmth. So you always have this feeling that, okay, I make myself vulnerable by providing them extra information about my view of the situation. So I make myself vulnerable to other people's judgments. And then I have a fear of harming the relationship. I'm worried about what other people will think about what I'm saying. What if I'm wrong? Yeah, again, some lack of confidence in your opinion. What if I'm misinterpreted, misunderstood by the other person? And then there's also this fear that if I keep voicing my I perspective all the time, then I'll be seen as being self-centered and arrogant. Yeah, something that she was
Also, I
mentioning.
think you have to see whether you have all the information to come to that.
Yes. So yeah, deficit of information. Again, we need to handle that to make it more positive, make it more healthy. So yeah, it's true that if you insist or you deploy it as your dominant strategy, then the first person's perspective, if you're not careful, you're not mindful about the excessive self-protection instinct that drives it. Inherently, there's the self-protection instinct that's there at the back, and that's driving your response. That's driving your first-person frame of reference. So if you're not careful, then you're excluding other perspectives, all the other perspectives, then you'll be seen as self-centered or arrogant. And that's a very valid kind of fear. But it's also better, it's a better strategy to consciously voice your first-person perspective rather than pretending that you don't have any wants or needs or expectations from the situation. It's better to lay it out on the table. But there's also an art to do it.
Yeah,
Can't be very forceful. You need to be tactful about it. Yeah.
Akshunya has posted the question.
Yes.
So did I?
Yeah. Go ahead.
She asked the way a corporate world is set up. In order to grow in that setup, we may need to act in certain ways, which might not be suitable for living in accordance with them. As a small example, it helps in corporate world to be aggressive in beating competitors and hit them in bad light, or even exaggerate your own work. If one gets a feedback from his manager that one needs to exhibit more of such traits, then how to resolve this conflict within oneself. So in one hand, we want to grow in the setup, and on the other hand, we want to live in a peaceful way. And also, is it possible to accept these traits and grow in this corporate setup and still living in accordance with them?
Yeah. I think some of these questions will be answered in the discussion that we're going to have. So maybe just ask you to hold on for maybe 2-3 minutes. So, and some of these points have been addressed. We talked about being mindful about the larger good. We can always think about collaborating to ensure that we're not looking at the same small pie, both of us kind of fighting over. We can be creative and then see how the pie can be expanded and grown so that both parties then benefit from it. And that's also a valid strategy. Of course, you need to be aware about the compulsions about your immediate environment. You can't be not aware of it and just deploy this other cherishing attitude wholesome all the time. That may not be the wisest decision. I mean, you have to combine your compassion, your empathy, your other cherishing attitude with proper discernment. Yeah, the compassion also has to be supported by adequate discernment. So compassionate discernment is required. But there's no situation that cannot be handled through the trainings that we looked at through our discussions. And yesterday we were having this discussion about how what are the benefits of other cherishing attitude as compared to the self-cherishing attitude. We can deploy that training in most of the situations, most of the conflicts that we experience. So Dharma has a role in whatever situation we find ourselves. We need to be aware of immediate expectations that the environment imposes on us. But Dharma will definitely be able to contribute positively to diffuse those situations. So some of these questions will be answered in the discussion. So how do we make the first-person frame of reference a little more healthy? So we have not, there's a deficit of intelligence or information that Akshana was referring to. So we need to enhance our mindfulness. So mindfulness is a strategy that we can use. We've seen how we, in the last session, I think Venerable Legden had discussed how mindfulness can be used to deal with situations at workplace. How mindfulness can enhance our productivity at workplace and all that. So practice observation of mindfulness, and specifically, what kind of observation that do you need to practice? You need to be mindful of this self-cherisher in you, and you need to modulate your expectations with a hint of other cherishing. So your first person frame of reference can become more healthy, more positive if you're mindful. And you also have to do some reflection on selflessness. Selflessness because you want to guard against the force, the influence, the power of this excessive self-protection instinct that you have. So the fear that we are referring to, the threats that we are referring to, which trigger conflicts, they're all driven by this excessive self-protection instinct that we have. So be mindful about it, and then reflect a bit on the teachings of selflessness that we spend so much time discussing. That will help you subdue or diffuse the impact of this excessive self-protection instinct. So that's the first adjustment that we need to make to ensure that the first person frame of reference is a little healthier than what it normally is. Then the second person frame of reference, she was mentioning how you can enhance your listening skills. The listening skills help you to make your second person frame of reference a little healthier than what it normally is. So the perspective then shifts from I to you. So when you make an effort to really listen to the other person, when the other person feels that he is being heard, his perspective is being acknowledged, then that true communication begins. Till then, it's all just fighting. It's not productive. And how do you listen? You listen with an open, non-judgmental ear. And a lot of listening is done through heart, and it's not only through your ears. You have to bring your heart into listening to the other person's perspective. You listen to the non-verbal cues that the other person is giving you. So listening is not just through your ears, even through your heart. And it's not just passive. You need to kind of intend. You need to want to listen to the other person. So it requires a lot of openness. It requires a lot of intention and generosity. Typically, why we don't listen is because we have a regular set of excuses for not listening to the other person's perspective. Typical reasons that you give is, I'm busy, I'm distracted, he's not going to say anything new that I haven't already heard. Anyway, whatever he says is not going to help us diffuse the situation. I don't want to give him any clue about my own perspectives. I don't want to give up my own opinion by listening to his perspective. And whatever he has already said, it's already been said, then I've heard it 1,000 times. And he is not going to tell the truth. So these are all excuses that you use to not listen to the other person's perspective. And there's also one fear that we have that the other person is in discomfort, some suffering. Then if he provides his perspective, then you're exposed to his pain, and you're going to feel hurt about it. You're going to kind of experience the pain that he's experiencing, or at least some part of it. We don't want to do that again. We're very defensive about that. So we don't want to experience the hurt that the other person is experiencing. So that's the reason why we don't listen, why we don't want to listen. So how do we listen then? We listen by emptying our minds. We already have a load of biases and prejudices driving our interaction with the other person. So we need to kind of cut down those prejudices, those biases a little bit, empty our minds a little bit so that the other person's perspective kind of sink in. We can internalize that. And we need to listen without interference from this ongoing commentary in our minds about commentary that is constantly evaluating what the other person is saying, constantly judging what the other person is saying. So we need to listen with non-judgmental ears. and also listen with the heart, with your heart, not just with ears, in a space that is not crowded with words or language. So non-verbal cues also can be registered. And how we make this second person frame of reference healthy, of course, listening and the practice of empathy. So again, here also mindfulness is a very useful strategy. So a combination of practicing mindfulness and practicing empathy. Empathy is apprehending other person's feelings, apprehension of other person's feelings. So you put yourself in the other person's shoes, so to say, and practice empathy. So empathy and mindfulness will enhance your second person perspective. And how do you enhance the third person perspective? So as we've seen, what is the third person perspective? It's the role of the witness, the objective truth. So how do you kind of cultivate this third person perspective? You just put some distance between yourself and the situation. See, this is all what strategies we are discussing is self-mediation. So you have to be the third person, provider of the third person perspective. You are the witness then. So how you do that is you put some distance between yourself and the situation and observe it as a neutral observer from a distance, without any kind of biases, without any kind of prejudices, without any kind of distortions from the first person and the second person perspective. So you want to position yourself as the witness. So the third person perspective is made more healthy, more positive by deploying, again, two kinds of strategies. Mindfulness, of course, is essential, and the practice of equanimity. So what is equanimity? We had discussed it yesterday. What is equanimity? Sorry?
Sort of a balance. Not
Yes.
really extremes.
Yeah, so you have kind of an even-mindedness of mind. You're not leaning towards either the I perspective or the you perspective, yeah? So you have this equanimity and you position yourself as a neutral observer. So you develop equanimity, some sort of an even-mindedness of mind, which has equal, I won't say indifference, equal affection to both perspectives, the I and the you perspective. And having cultivated equanimity, then you position yourself as a neutral observer. And then because of that, you will have better intelligence to then deploy the third person perspective to diffuse the conflict situation. So this is the third person perspective. So that is what will help us in developing an effective collaboration strategy. And again, I was referring to how we can use the strategy to collaborate instead of compete, collaborate, grow the pie bigger, so that both parties can benefit. So how do you collaborate? You learn how to shift your attention from the positions that the two parties are taking. From positions, you try and understand what are the interests of the two parties. Yeah. So instead of being consumed by the two positions which are incompatible, it's possible that you could have incompatible positions, but you have some sort of shared interests. So you try and through discussion, identify what those shared interests could be. Yeah, even between a subordinate and a boss, there could be some shared interests. Both of them want the good of the company, so that both of them benefit from the good of the company, from the company prospering. So there are some shared interests. So you create a situation where the shared interests can be defined and identified, and through that process you can then identify a framework where you can collaborate. So you use this strategy, identifying interest, the shared interest, instead of being just consumed by the positions that the two parties, the involved parties have. So use collaborative negotiations. Use some sort of skillful reframing of the positions that the two parties have. You can use less threatening language, reduce the use of threatening language. You can shift from short-term to long-term goals. That also kind of helps you diffuse the situation. So reframe the conflict, reframe the description of the conflict, so that you're using a more long-term perspective instead of using a short-term perspective. and use less threatening language, reduce the use of threatening language. So here, you're talking about deploying mindfulness, of course, is common. Then you use a more compassionate and empathetic discernment of the situation to identify what is called the shared benefits. So if you have identified shared benefits, then you will be in a better position to deal with the conflict and diffuse the conflict. So there are 4 strategies that we spoke of. The first one, to enhance or make the first person frame of reference healthier. First one is mindfulness and selflessness, practice of selflessness. So reducing the influence of the self-cherisher in you, giving a little more leeway to the other cherisher in you. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy is having mindfulness, of course, and empathetic listening. Second one. The third one is developing mindfulness with equanimity. Equanimity is the third. It helps you enhance, make your third person frame of reference healthier. And the fourth strategy that we spoke of, which promotes collaboration, is practice of mindfulness and compassionate discernment or empathetic discernment, which helps you identify shared interest. So those are the 4 different kinds of approaches that you can use to diffuse conflict situations. Whether it is workplace conflicts or personal conflicts at home, you can use these strategies to diffuse them.
The conflict goes really high, like you really can't. I mean, people are not willing to talk.
Yeah, yeah.
Or if they don't go on.
So the other cherisher in you would want to kind of not take it to that extent. Yeah, you would want to kind of approach the person immediately and say, okay, we have this problem, okay, we don't see eye to eye. I think you are a little stiff. The other person says, I think that you are arrogant. And then the discussion kind of starts from that point. Yeah?
But it's hard to bring it to that point.
Yeah.
They can say these to each other.
Yeah, it is very hard. So that's the reason. Other cherishing is not easy to do. So, yes.
There's nothing wrong with the conflict going, be confident with
Yes. Yes.
yourself. Be confident with yourself. Try to, get to your potential, your full potential.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't put down the other person.
Yes.
I mean, if you are good enough, automatically you will overshine. You don't have to put down another person.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, aggression is a valid strategy.
Talk and be the best you can be.
Aggression and being assertive is a valid strategy, even in corporate situations. Yeah.
And I realize even when you are a little younger, when you're in a conflict zone or in a conflict, you try to push your further. It's actually becoming more aggressive, area of fear.
Yeah.
And you're actually worsening the situation.
Yeah.
What you say, open that heart.
Yeah.
I grow wisdom and emotional back.
Yes.
Then you give the other person also some time and space.
Right.
To try to listen to their point of view.
Right.
Understand them. But that's where that that understanding also sort of comes in.
Correct.
And then maybe you could even get.
I'm not sure whether Akshunya can hear what she said, but I think most of the things that I wanted to say to address this question have already said. So.
Venerable, do you think that ownership plays a role in conflict resolution? By which I mean, a lot of times when conflict arises, you think of things out like they have caused it.
Yes.
Others have caused it. You sort of don't acknowledge when you find yourself in a conflict, you also played some part.
Yeah.
And so, taking ownership of the conflict and realizing that this is happening in my life.
Yes.
So it's my conflict.
Yes.
And hence, how do I, I know I tend to look at conflict as it's outside of me, it's happening to me.
Yes.
And that doesn't.
That's our first instinct, yeah. So the survival mechanism in you is trying to say that, okay, you're not responsible, the rest of the world is responsible for it. But then you're trying to kind of also bring empathy into, diffusing the situation. So when you have that perspective, the empathetic perspective, you look at the conflict from the other person's perspective. That will help you kind of realize, okay, I've also contributed to the situation. And because the other person, of course, would claim that you done this, which is brought this situation to this state. So his perspective, we would kind of imbibe that through the practice of empathy. So you're right, yeah, ownership, but ownership will come through empathy, I guess. Owning the situation, it will come through the practice of empathy.
Yeah, coming to the point of empathy only is difficult, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Because you're so much consumed by the fact that, oh, they have ruined by doing
Yes.
these.
Yeah. But just being aware that, okay, the first instinct, this is my instinctive response. I mean, I need to hold back a little bit. Just giving you those precious moments of pause. Yeah. Let me not respond immediately, react immediately. Let me try and evaluate the situation a little bit. That itself would be a good cause for you to diffuse the
I think
situation.
it helps to look at your internal, what you would have done to cause this. If you can sort of reflect on that.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. I think we can stop here. Maybe we are already over scheduled time, a lot. So yeah, just wanted to do a short meditation, but we can skip that. Let's do a short dedication. So just relax. You, Shanti, she had some follow-up.
She was responding.
Uh,
As to let more unemployment for strategies. Mindfulness and selflessness, reducing the influence of self-judgment and give no weightage to the other judgment. So that empathetic listening, that equity enhance that person perspective, and for practice of mindfulness and empathetic discernment.
okay. Yeah, those are the strategies we discussed. If there are any follow-up questions, maybe we can take it up later. She can post the questions on chat, email them to you, forward those questions to me, can discuss it later. So yeah, I'll just do a short dedication to this. Relax and make yourself comfortable in your postures, straight back, straight, back erect. And just take a moment to just reflect on the discussion that we had, just a minute. Just recollect the 4 strategies that we just discussed to enhance the 3 perspectives that can help you handle conflict situations. And since we have participated in this discussion, given some of our resources, time and energy, we've used those resources productively and hopefully created some merit. So whatever merit we've created, let's direct that merit. So due to the merit of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a completely enlightened Guru Buddha and lead all sentient beings without exceptions into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your time and patience. Have a good weekend. Namo Buddhaya.
Winter minutes.
That's it. Thank you very much, all.